Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday, November 5th. I think time seems to be passing very oddly, especially given the current state of affairs. I myself have been looking forward to this for the last couple of days because I could definitely use a break from watching the television and watching election returns, or trying to anyways, while balancing doing work as well. But luckily, I get to have a little bit of fun and also do some work this afternoon, since it is Thursday. And this afternoon, I get to connect with one of my good friends in the industry. We've never worked directly together, but we've always kind of run in the same circles. We've always been fortunate enough to spend a lot of fun, really just incredible time in Mexico together, not just with each other, but with a really incredible group of usually bartenders and other industry professionals. But I'm really excited to get some one-on-one time. For those of you who know him, as I mentioned on the Facebook announcement, is to love him. For those of you that don't, you're about to meet a really just interesting and just one of the absolute nicest and most enthusiastic ambassadors for agave spirits in general, not just mezcal or tequila. My guest this afternoon is Khrys Maxwell. Khrys, how are you doing, my friend? I think he's joining us from out in Southern California. There he is.
I am doing great. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. Honestly, it is great to see you. I've been very fortunate in the people that I've been able to convince to jump on with me, take time out of their busy schedules. Today's no exception. I'm really glad to see you. I know Muertos just finished up, and this is usually right around the time that we would be running into each other, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely correct. And thank you for the very kind words. Much appreciated, for sure. It's been a drag not being down in Mexico for Dia at all. It's my first time in the United States for this part of the year since 2009. So it's kind of really odd to actually be here for Halloween. It's like, what? But yeah, I definitely miss all of our friends and doing all the industry trips for Fortaleza for Dia, and then doing our add-on trips to Oaxaca and getting down and seeing you and everybody else with Vago and everybody else who we would go out and see too. So
so that is, where you and I first crossed paths was, I think it was not 2000, I think it was 2016 was when we first actually connected. I had heard your name mentioned in passing circles, really, when I was working in Houston at the time. And I had heard people mention Khrys or ask me if I knew Khrys, and I just had not really put it together until we actually met each other in Oaxaca. And that was so you one of your biggest roles, I guess, in Fortaleza was leading the distillery trips. Is that right?
So yeah, that was definitely part of my duties, was doing that, putting together, managing the add-on trips to Oaxaca that we've done, and a whole host of other things, whether that it's marketing visits or events around the country. So it wasn't just based in one particular area, but throughout the entire United States. And I was fortunate enough to kind of get in on the ground floor. And, I was I had asked, I met Guillermo. My first time I met Guillermo was on my own trip to Tequila back in 2007. And the fact that he lived here in San Diego as well at that point in time, because he had the distillery down there, but he had a real job here that, and his son to raise, because Billy was still in elementary school or junior high at that point in time, maybe high school. And so he had to be here in the United States, and he would take his vacation time to go down to Mexico during production and the overseeing of the actual building of the distillery from 1999 is when he decided he was going to get that old distillery up and running again. And then, by 2007, when I met down there, he was only producing I won't say maybe 4 weeks a year. So it wasn't quite often. And so he was living mostly in the United States. I'm would go and hang out with him. And after like a year or so, I'm like, dude, let me help you out. And he's like, oh, I can't afford to pay you. And I'm like, well, I'll work for tequila. He's like, oh, I can't even afford to give you a bottle of tequila. And so, because that's how tight everything was. And then about a year or so after that, got a call, hey, can you come and help with an event? And started helping with some events around San Diego, and then building up the social media presence, and then just kind of like built upon those responsibilities over the years. So at that point in time, like it was literally like Guillermo and Marco, and then we brought on another guy. His name was Matt, who ended up taking essentially Guillermo's job here in the United States as far as like running the actual sales and whatnot. And then after Billy graduated from college, he took that gig. So he's the director of marketing and sales in that role. So we started off with super small number of people, and really it still is a small number of people, for the entire world. It's crazy how small the marketing team is, and the presence that we have. But I think that it goes to show, like, having a quality product and really, making inroads with the industry people, like, that's the key in that aspect for the brand, so. And met like a lot of amazing people in my time with Fortaleza. Absolutely amazing. Like all the industry people are amazing, and I've been blessed for sure.
I didn't realize, I guess I didn't realize that in all this time that you have basically been with Fortaleza essentially from the beginning, which is kind of crazy. I knew that you had always been very closely connected to the group, to the family, to the organization, which is very easy to see because they're so warm and they're so welcoming. But that's really incredible that you really grew Fortaleza from, like you said, from the ground up. And I think that's really, really incredible, which makes it even more remarkable that, and we'll get into it in a little bit, that you have since, kind of diversified what it is that you're doing. I don't think you would ever, completely sever that relationship. But it's just really, really incredible that you've been part of such a, just a beloved brand, a beloved family among the industry, and just a really tight group of friends who are working together to represent that brand. Everybody who has stepped in and participated in the way that you have in leading trips, etc. Whether it's Brian in Denver or buddy Jared in Boston, and just been really active in that program, are people that are really beloved, and you're no exception, are people that are really beloved within the industry, in their local communities, nationally, and are really the envy of a lot of bartenders, I think, and a lot of just industry professionals who are looking to get active and become more involved with brands that they're really, really passionate about. Did you see Fortaleza as growing into that when you started out with them, or was it really just because of your love of the category, of the brand, of Guillermo? First of all, let me interject. Great Guillermo impression, by the way. I know you've probably to work on that, but the voice is pretty pitch perfect. It does sound like he's got a pound of gravel in there. But was it something that you already saw? That you could see that? Did you know that brand that the brand was going to evolve to become so beloved, or do you think that was really the work of you guys on the ground pushing it?
I don't really know. When I originally asked Guillermo to help him, it was just like, I want to help grow the brand, right? I just want to help you. Like at that point in time, it was him and one other person. His name's Lance, that was doing everything back in like 2006, 2007, and like, I just wanted to help with whatever I could in any way, shape, or possible, right? And I just thought that it was a great product. It was something that was different, and it was not just a marketing brand in a fancy bottle or anything like that, but it was culturally and historically significant.
Hmm.
And there wasn't anybody that was really kind of pushing that envelope at the time. And being a musician who really appreciates handcrafted instruments, like I came into like, okay, this is cool. And then also being a musician who's been DIY my entire life, with no investors, with no record labels, da 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 da. Well, I mean, there was a record label, but anyway. So, but for the most part, I happened to rely on myself to be able to do everything. When here's Guillermo, he was obviously gifted a distillery, but he had to get it up and run. He was doing everything himself. Like that ethic aspect of it was just like, okay, cool. Like it was just tied in with every value of what I appreciated.
Hmm.
And I just knew it needed help, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do that for sure.
So, you've mentioned music when I kind of alluded to it a little bit when I was posting that we're going to be lucky enough to have you on today. You originally, you kind of grew up, found your path, started out in the music community, which is what you have since really returned to a little bit more to focus on full time. But what was your work with Fortaleza? Was that your first foray into kind of the service industry? Obviously, music service industry, very, very closely related. But was that your first real foray into working in the beverage industry in any way when you just kind of stepped into or wanted to help Guillermo, or had you already worked in bars or been familiar with kind of, to the tequila industry before that?
So, I mean, as a kid, my first 5 years of having a job, I worked at Round Table Pizza and I got to be the bartender. But serving beer and wine doesn't really count. But there are still some uh, things that line up with that, right? So, whether we're counting the books or making the dough or, tapping the lines, so those are good, traits that I had to start with. And went into the music industry. And I've always had love for Mexico. And it starts like when I was super, super duper young. And tequila had always been my drink. And um, uh, at at one point in time, I was like, oh, hey, I want to have my own tequila brand, right? And then uh, when I was forced to get an additional job to because of economic aspects, um, super long story short, I ended up getting what I thought was going to be a part-time job working at Bevmo. Um, and at that point in time, we're getting a part-time job. Okay, it's like I want to have something to learn about the tequila industry. Like if I'm going to have my own brand, I want to kind of start from ground zero. So realizing that as a musician, I don't see the bars that I'm playing at really serving like proper spirits and
Yeah.
cocktails, right? So I didn't really think of like going into that. I didn't see that. I didn't understand the importance of what bartenders and bars and restaurants do for the industry. And and typically when I was playing, like you're getting your drinks for free, and for the most part, the only thing you're really getting is like you might get like a pitcher of beer, like
Right.
being realistic, right? So so I just kind of like saw the only place that sells booze was like in retail. So I went into that route. Plus also like if I would have gotten into a bar, like that would have conflicted with doing band things, whether it's rehearsals or gigs or recording or whatever. So I actually started waking up really hella early to go and be at a job at 9 a.m., which was so against like, it was like such a drag. Uh, And I was used to like getting up at noon, like just like kind of like doing my thing. Then, it's like, okay, I got some stuff to take care of. Okay, and this is only gonna be like a 6-month stint. But no, it lasted much longer. And during that time period, I learned more about some other distillates and wine. I mean, the education that would come through was minimal, and I've actually heard it's less than that now. But I got a taste of it and kind of like understood what the differences were between a Scotch and an Irish whiskey, and just real super basic things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then wines and all that. You had to stock the entire store, and then talking to customers who what they were into, and that type of thing. And so I started that job in 2006, and then started working for Fortaleza in November of 2009. And so during this time I'm still doing the band thing, I'm still teaching guitar, still still doing all these things, just hustling just to be able to keep everything afloat. And by 2011 I was able to quit Bevmo because I was getting more responsibilities with Fortaleza. And then probably by like end of 2012, like I was getting more responsibilities, and I was also kind of jaded with like the whole band thing at that point in time. And so I put more focus and efforts into Fortaleza, but I was still teaching, and that kind of like led into, for the next however many years, 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
when you started working with Fortaleza, what was did you have a job title, or were you just kind of in charge of the US brand representation? Or I feel like you, much like myself, having worked for Vago and worked for such a small company, and just kind of, fit in where I was needed, or at least tried to. Some roles I was better suited for than others, admittedly. But when you're working, like you said, it's very DIY, which seems very much to match the ethos of the way that you came up making music. It's just, you have to be adaptable and serving many roles. Or was your work always pretty specific when you were working with Fortaleza?
So yes and no. Like to start off with is just like help with events, and like within those events they were like charity events, and that would be like the source of our marketing budgets. Like, okay, Guillermo built this really cool bar, and it's collapsible, throw it in the back of my car and roll around like Southern California, because at that point in time that was like the majority of our market, right? And do tasting events for at bars and restaurants, or at charity events, and then industry events as well, and then started kind of like getting other things. So it was kind of like, it was like working within the marketing aspect but didn't have a title. And then at one point in time I was given a title of events manager, but like I did a lot more than just events. So very much like a utility guy. I like saw myself as being like the fullback of the team. And to me, like the fullback is the most badass of football players, because he's the one that will just like lay like the gnarly block, and he'll also take the ball and just shove it down your throat for 3 yards, right? And so I didn't mind, that aspect. I'm not like into titles and those things. Like just do what you do. Understand that some people think that titles are important, but for the most part, I refuse to have a title with Fortaleza because of the fact I was doing more than just one particular thing.
Got it. That makes sense. And I've always felt the same way too. I think people, when I'm meeting people, they ask me my job title or understanding what it is. And the people who have worked for a small company before kind of immediately they see the look on your face as you try and think of how to explain exactly what it is that you do. And they're like, oh no, never mind. I get it. Okay.
Yep.
But otherwise, unless you've worked for a small brand, especially one that is so, focused within the context of a family, it's a very different world, because I've worked in very corporate structures before as well. Obviously, I think you can kind of compare and contrast it to the idea of working at something like a Bevmo, I would imagine, and it's just a completely different world of when you're working for that small of a brand. And I think it really is very reflective of, kind of, again, to relate it back to your musical background, of that DIY perspective, or that DIY mentality of just making things work, piecing it together with duct tape, whatever you need to do to
Yeah,
to get it
absolutely.
out there.
Yeah. And I will always be a supporter of everybody who is coming from that, type of thing. If somebody's rolling in town with like $1 billion to blow and it's all fancy and smancy, it's like, dude, like, I'm not interested. No.
Yeah. I mean, and that, even like that, I don't know. I might catch flack for this. I might not. I mean, I don't know if whoever's watching, but that also affects the way that I perceive smaller brands as well. In that I'm usually a lot more forgiving from a quality perspective if it's something that is done in earnest, because I think that 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 very small scale, very heartfelt. And I see it a lot in mezcal brands as well, in that, people are trying to figure it out. They're eager to get a product out. And if it's within, you typically, when we're talking about mezcal, a lot of times it's a family run operation. It's somebody who, like a lot of producers, have been producing locally or in very small scales, and are finally seeing the opportunity there to start their own family brand. I think I don't know, it's very energizing. Makes me very optimistic to see so many different small operations getting off the ground. And it's just, I don't know, I wish they could all be successful. Obviously they cannot, but it really is it's immediately endearing to see all these brands and trying to make their way in this agave spirits landscape. I wish there was more space, and I'd love to hear your opinion or your perspective on, for those of you that, I mean, I have my own kind of assumptions and theories on why it is, but in the tequila industry, everything is done at such a larger scale that you don't really see something like a story like a Fortaleza coming out that is so independent and so DIY, versus, there's plenty of small tequila brands out there, but they are, quote unquote contract brands that are being produced out of a facility that, while the brand itself might be small, the facility producing it might be producing 6, 7, 8 different marks of varying recipes. What is, for those that don't know, what are some of the factors that limit that kind of smaller scale of production from taking root in the tequila industry?
Well, I think there's going to be more. I think we're actually going to see more smaller producers that are going to come up. People that are going to be content with having, one, 30-ton oven, and, having their own brand and slowly growing within that context. Right. But there's also going to be a lot of brands that are like, oh, hey, we got a diffuser. We can do like 1 million liters in five minutes. Right. So, I think it's going to vary on a number of different things. I think that if we all look back on what the craft beer industry has brought to the world, right? Because if we look at where craft beer started in the 90s and how that moved, the whole farm to table and small brand and smaller producer type of ideals, rather than mass produce same quality product every single time, like McDonald's, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have within the tequila industry, we have both of those types of concepts that are happening, and we're going to see more of each. I think Coscoin is a great example. There's somebody who's been around for a really, really, really long time. um, but super small distillery that until David Suro didn't have any product that was in the United States, and that's super rad that Dave was able to you know to bring their product and their story to our attention. And because of that, they've also had actually I'll take that back, because Revolution is a brand that's been in the United States for a really long time, but nobody really, I've never seen it garner anything in the marketplace, and they've never talked about who was producing. It was just a bottle. Okay, here's our product. Not it was not about who's producing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of the important thing, is whether we're talking about tequila, mezcal, rum, right? With these smaller producers, like if you're a contract brand, are you celebrating your producer? Are you talking about who they are, their history, what they've done? And I think those things are really super important. If we're going to celebrate the brand and what you're doing as a brand, you need to celebrate your producers as well. And I think Suro is awesome in doing that every single time, for sure. But I think Cascawin is a great brand, who a brand slash producer who's small and is doing really cool things, whether we're talking about their standard line, or getting into Suro's product with the Ancestral, doing the first earth pit cooked agave within the tequila industry since 100 years, whatever. So I think we're going to see more stuff like that.
Do you see as much space, kind of keeping with this project, with this idea of, our brands celebrating their producers, and then that kind of got me down the rabbit hole of, well, our producers, or our brands, our brand owners, people who are looking to start brands, are they, do you see them, or do you know of people who are being, or do you see a shift in people being a little bit more deliberate in the distilleries that they are looking to work with? And that kind of led me down the next question of, well, what are the differences in the facilities, really, because one of the things that people talk about a lot is the homogeneity of the tequila industry, how similar everything is, for not, and that's not exhaustive in the category, but it is something that is very prevalent, I think, is a lack of diversity in flavor profiles as people have modernized and streamlined their operations. So I guess my question is twofold. Do you see room for more innovation, like you were just talking about with Cascawin, and thereby kind of differentiating operations at different distilleries? And then do you see people who are starting with brands, or who own brands, being deliberate in, being a little bit more, deliberate in deciding who they're going to work with?
So I think that, there are definitely people who, when they're doing a brand, have done their homework, and they're coming in to find something specific.
Yeah.
And they probably know who their producers are, that are appreciated, and are doing amazing things. So whether we're talking about El Pendio, with Felipe Camarena, doing contract brands as well. And or if somebody's going to go to whoever the first producer is that they come across, that they meet, and and somebody's like, oh yeah, we can make you the best tequila in the world, as every tequila producer says that they make the best tequila in the world. And so some people will just see it like, okay, I've got juice, and I've got this fancy bottle, and I'm going to do this and that, and they're not putting the time into the research of that.
Uh-huh.
And I think that we see the same thing within the mezcal world. Like people will just like, fly into Oaxaca, like I'm going to do a brand. They, get to Matalan, they're like, oh, there's all these producers here, awesome, and that's it, and that's as far as they get, right?
Yeah.
So but then there are people who, like, okay, I know exactly what it is that I'm looking to do, and how I can make something do something a little bit different and add to the conversation within the world of mezcal rather than just having a product.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that so many tequila producers, claim that their tequila, they produce the best tequila, or the smoothest tequila. That is, and I don't know the reason for this. I don't know if it's a cultural thing or of kind of southern Mexico versus more central Mexico, or the tequila producing regions versus the rest of Mexico. But I do hear a lot of producers use superlatives a lot when they're talking about their tequilas, right? It's the smoothest, it's the best, it's the richest. I don't hear that use of superlative used nearly as much in Oaxaca and other mezcal producing regions. There seems to be a lot more sense of not necessarily a much more sense of, I don't know if mine's the best or not, but it is mine.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot more acceptance of the concept of varying styles being the right way to produce something, that there is no right answer. There's several right answers. And I really don't know what that is, but I think it's one of the interesting dynamics that you see that differentiates the two categories. People in tequila seem to be searching out the best or the smoothest. And I don't know if that's just the influence of marketing speak and what brands are looking for historically when they've approached producers and what they're looking to get out of the product versus the search for different flavor profiles in tequila. I don't know what it is, but I don't hear nearly as many palenqueros talking about my mezcal is the best. It's the smoothest, it's the least smoke, the most smoke, or whatever. I see a lot more producers just thinking in the context of, well, this is mine.
Yeah, and that for me is one of the things that I really love and appreciate, for sure. Anytime I hear somebody say like, I make the best of whatever, like, no, there's no best anywhere. There's no one best taco. There's no one best, tequila. There's no one best guitar player. It's not possible. You can have like really good, and then you can have some people that just, not so good, right? But what I love about mezcal producers, or those that are making agave, Distilled agaves, is that they're like, this is what I do. If you like it, then awesome. I appreciate that you like it. I would say that the whole like machismo thing, of like a tequila producer saying that they're making the best is coming down to like, I think that's more of the European influence, the European
Okay.
mentality. If I could, and culturally it's different, and I'm sure you can kind of see the same thing that's going to happen in Mexico City. But with the tequila industry being based around Guadalajara, it has much more of a European influence than Oaxaca, which is much more indigenous, right? And it's also in Oaxaca, they're people that have had to live off of the land, and they respect the land, and there's a lot more respect in general across the board than what I would see in the tequila industry. And the tequila industry is just more competitive, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that in any way, shape, or form. But whenever I hear anybody say, like, I mean, that's the best tequila ever, it's like I kind of laugh. I appreciate, their pride. And, that's one thing that it's like, okay, cool. Awesome.
You know, going back to what we were talking just a couple minutes ago, back to the concept of innovation as well, and this also speaks to kind of the idea of producers each having kind of having their own path, having their own method. Obviously, there's much more differentiation in production methods in the mezcal side of things. But we have mentioned innovation within the tequila industry. The examples that immediately come to mind are, sticking in the SNS family, obviously Carlos and Tomas with their approach to terroir, sense of place, field specific raw material for different batches with Tequila Ocho. You mentioned Cascaween as well, working with David on the ancestral process, right, of kind of going back to the old ways to forge something new to the market. Are there other examples that stick out in your head of people kind of thinking outside the box and kind of breaking the paradigm of tequila production that has been so entrenched in both the Valley and the Highlands? Do you see other producers? It doesn't have to necessarily be radical, but people who are kind of stepping outside the box a little bit in how they're producing.
Yeah, so I would say obviously with Sophie Debec doing with her Calle Trace
Yeah,
the Criollo.
that's who I had on last week. She's great.
Yeah. And the Criollo using, like, for those that don't know, it's a type of variation of the blue agave. So it's going to be super small, high sugar concentration, typically on the slopes with around Atotonilco.
Mhm.
And so she has done, I think it's one batch of this, and it's an autoclave product, fermented in stainless steel and distilled in stainless steel. But because of her attention to detail across the board, and what I love about Sophie's, amazing things, so as a chemist who fell in love with Mexico, like, is really into yeast and how everything works. So she's really, like, detail oriented, and like, she makes these tools work great for her, and she always makes delicious stuff. And but using this specific agave has changed what tequila can taste like, and it's super awesome. Like, I tasted it blind at her house, oh man, 2016, I want to say, maybe 2017. She, like,
17.
laid out.
I remember I tasted it when she still had, I don't think it had been released yet. I think it was 2017.
Okay,
Yeah.
so she had us taste, I want to say, like, 4 or 5 different Blancos, and they were all different ABVs, and the variances in flavor profile were pretty drastic from one to the next. And there was one particular, I'm like, damn, this tastes like a mezcal. And come to find out, like, they were all the exact same distillate, which is the Criollo, but at different ABVs. And the difference in flavor profiles just, like, blew my mind how drastic, that changed. And so I think that that's a huge game changer, and I really wish the tequila industry would do 2 things: A, follow the path of mezcal, but they're never going to do that because tequila thinks they're better than mezcal. But to have artisanal production and then non, right? So you can have, when you say artisanal tequila, that it's a category, that it's
Okay,
a
so
legit
you are
thing.
so when you're using those 2 words, you're talking about creating specific legal designations and definitions for those 2 words.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Right. And allow just only within the artisanal the use of other types of agaves, to open up that flavor profile, but only agaves that are going to be within the DO.
Got it.
So I'd like to see that happen. And then yeah, so yeah, those two things, the using different agave as well as having the an actual artisanal.
Yeah, and if anybody watching has not seen last week, 2 weeks ago, like I said at the beginning, time blurs together these days. But we did do, my last guest was Sophie de Quebec. She's incredible, a really incredible distiller in Jalisco, Calle 23. We had her on, so please, I highly encourage you to go back and learn all about Sophie and what she does and why she's spectacular as a person, a distiller, and why 23 is spectacular. And we do talk a bit about the criollo towards the end. So if you have any questions or curious about that, please do go back and watch that episode. It was one of my favorites for sure. And we have a few Facebook questions, which is next up on my list, but you touched on something just a moment ago that I think I mentioned to you. Is that one of the Humidor new mixes in that mug there, Khrys?
You got it.
You touched on it, and it was something I wanted to touch on as well. I've had a similar experience. It was with David at Cascaween with my old boss and my friend Bobby Hugo from Houston. We got to sit around a table, and we actually tasted the Siembra Valles when he was testing out proofs for the high proof bottling. And it was just really illuminating to try tequila at different proofs. And that, is exactly what I want to ask you about is, I've seen a few other labels working on high proof expressions as well. Is that something that you see becoming more common? And, kind of a secondary question, why and how is it that 40% became the industry standard when it seems like a lot of things can be so much more expressive at 45, 50, 55%?
Yeah. Well, I think, for the longest time, tequila was, bottled in Mexico at like 45, 46 ABV. That was common throughout, right? And then, when taxes change, you have that whole profit kind of thing that's going on. And then the biggest thing that kind of screwed the tequila industry is while they're chasing the American market, Americans back in the 60s and the 70s are like, oh my God, what is this? This is like way too intense. And you have a lot of palates that were not, that were drinking either vodka or drinking whiskey. Some people might have been drinking gin, but as far as like anything neat, the flavor profile was not as big and intense as what tequila is. And I think that by lowering the ABV, it helped with that, bringing it down to 40%. I don't know what the legal specifications were for distillates back in the 60s and 70s. But I do know that tequila has to be bottled at least 40% ABV for the United States market. And if it's done under 40%, it actually has to say on the label diluted with water, which is odd because like it's already been diluted to begin with, but nobody said the TTB was exactly.
But those 2% are also water.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that extra 2% of dilution, that's water too, don't worry.
Yeah. But I think that because of whiskeys being a thing at higher ABV, as far as like, any of the single barrel type of things, or a lot of, just in general, they are at a higher ABV, whether it's 43% or above, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, after a while, we were looking for something a little bit more. And I remember like when I started doing my, annual trips with the Blue Agave tour of, to where we do a full week of visiting, like 12 different distilleries, right?
Yeah.
And like 2008, I'm like, hey, can we taste this off the still? Can we taste this undiluted? And then that became like my thing. And like, I remember, by 2010, like being at La Atena and tasting it off the stomach, oh my God, this is like the greatest thing ever. Can I have a bottle? And can I buy a bottle from you? And Carlos is like, you want to buy a bottle? I'm like, yeah, sure. Like, can I have two, please? And that's like, that would have been like the first sale of Tapatio 110 at that point in time. So unlabeled, unmarked, the way, get it right from the producer, the way that it should be, right? So and just more people were looking for those distillates. And as we're drinking mezcal that's at 45% and higher, we want to have that more of that character, and to have no water added, and yeah, awesome.
I agree with you 100%, man. I mean, I have always loved the more expressiveness of something that is, not even like 50, 55 necessarily, but even, at 46, 47, it's a market difference in a lot of brands. Depending on the brand, depending on the distillation, there can be a market difference between the flavor profiles, particularly on the back end, on the finish, that you're getting at something that's 45 versus 47.3, let's say.
And for me, like, the finish is everything. That's the truth.
Yeah.
I'm not into like, oh, like I'm just gonna taste it and throw it back, and like, no, like the finish, I want the finish to be extremely long. I want it to tell a story.
Yep.
And you're gonna get that at the higher ABVs. And honestly, I'd rather have what comes off the still as Maya well intended, and use my somebody had mentioned that I chew my tequilas and my mezcals, and because I'll sit there and like I spend time, right? And what I've realized is I actually use my saliva for dilution to open up those flavor profiles, if that makes sense. So like, rather than using water, I'm using my own saliva for that.
One other secondary note, I would like to confirm that you are indeed the king of asking if you can buy a bottle of something. Several points of production with you, you're always the guy like, hey, can we get a bottle? Can we get a bottle of this? Can we maybe buy some bottles? That is peak Khrys Maxwell right there.
Right now.
All right, so we only have a little bit more than 10 minutes. We got about 12, 13 minutes left. So I do want to get through some of the comments from the people that are watching us out there on Facebook. Thank you for supporting, for joining us, you guys. Again, share it once you feel free to share these on your streams. We're getting some really great traction and enthusiasm from people and feedback. So thank you so much for joining us again. Susan from Mezcalistas is asking, how do you think smaller brands find room on the shelf given the realities of alcohol distribution? I think it's getting easier myself, but I'll wait to hear your thoughts.
And it might be easier because now mezcal is like exploding, right?
Yeah.
There might be more people, but if you don't have people with boots on the ground, you're losing a battle.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difference between there's a difference between selling and moving, right, and getting a second order of something versus finding distribution in the first place, right? I think finding distribution is probably the easier of those two things, because I think a lot of people are opening boutique distribution houses, are direct importing, granted, we're in the middle of a pandemic, slightly different, but at the end of last year, let's say, people were opening small boutique distribution houses, direct importing stuff, and looking for more boutique-y, geeky brands. I think that's one of the reasons that you see so many different mezcal brands popping into the market, is because people are constantly looking to, start their own little boutique-y brand. And I think these smaller distributors are looking for something that they can grow, particularly since, I think you see some of the brands grow beyond what some of the distributors can handle. So I think there's a door turning that I think provides a lot of opportunity for small brands to find distribution. What I think is lacking is the knowledge of the producer at the producer level, whether we're talking about a tequila brand or a mezcal producer, the knowledge to pick the right distributor, because I think there are more distributors out there and everybody wants something from Mexico in their portfolio that is cool and new and smaller production volume. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best equipped to sell that brand, to speak about that brand. Like you said, have boots on the ground selling it. Usually it's one or two people that are running these distribution operations. So I think is one of the more challenging things is to find the right distributor personally.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And it's not just having a distributor, because you could have, a lot of people want to be with like the top distributors, but the reality is that as a small product, you're probably going to, be shelved so that their sales team can push the brands that have more incentive to do so.
100%.
And that's the downside, right?
Yep.
So
we also have a question here. Speaking on the part of more innovation or styles, speaking on the part of more innovation or styles, will we see more things coming from other states, Zacatecas, et cetera, out on the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of room to grow within that. I really like right now, like I'm loving the mezcales that I'm tasting from Durango, but like, I think we're gonna see. Honestly, I think we're gonna end up seeing stuff that's gonna come from Baja. I know that wine producers are already kind of playing around, and we will see some destillados that are coming from Baja, from these wine producers. So I think that it's interesting, and it's going to be super expressive. And we have this whole world of distillates that are on par with all within one country, that's on par with all the wines from the world, and it's going to be great.
The one thing I will say, it's funny that you mentioned Baja, and Sonora as well. One of the things I'm really curious about, and this is more of a long-term issue, but I will be curious to see how the industry, how producers attack it, or not attack it, but adapt to it. Alcohol production, fermentation, distillation is a really water-intense enterprise, and there's not a ton of water in a lot of these places. Like I remember I was speaking with a friend in Arizona who knew somebody who was trying to grow cane, I think near the Colorado River Delta, or what used to be the Colorado River. No, it wasn't in the Delta. It was somewhere else in Sonora. But one of the big issues was that they're just not getting rain. So I'd be really, obviously cane, much more water intense crop than agave is, but production of agave distillates is pretty water intense. So I would be really curious to see how they mitigate that issue, 10, 20 years in the future, if it does actually take hold like you think it will. And then we also have a question from Juan Pablo down in Jalisco, asking, how are the smallest categories like Raicilla, Soto, Bacanora, how are they getting traction in the market and expected growth with the impulse of, or I guess the momentum of mezcal and tequila? Do you see more of a space for those distillates? Do you think they're going to get lost in the shuffle? Do you see more presence for those brands, but not necessarily significant sales volume? What do you think?
I think that, as mezcal is growing, that we're going to have the Bacanoras and we're going to have the Raicillas that are growing. People, they're going to be like, oh, what is this? Why is this interesting? Why should I taste it? And and that relates to the previous question of just like the entire category of mezcal. Like, as we know, mezcal is a cultural word, and as long as the agave is cooked, it's a mezcal. If the agave is not cooked, it's not a mezcal. And if it can't be a mezcal, it cannot be a tequila. Anywho, so within that aspect, I think that there's going to be plenty of growth Um, but of course, it's going to be within certain regions. I mean, I don't think that we're going to see much in sales of really obscure agave distillates in, say, Salt Lake City,
Right.
right? Or Birmingham, Alabama. They might have like a few people that are supporting, but we also need to realize that what culture plays into what we consume.
Mhm.
And living here in Southern California, we are big on the agave distillates because we are part of Mexico. Historically and culturally, we are part of Mexico. So
Yes.
it's always been there.
Well, we only have about 5 more minutes to wrap up. I did want to get your thoughts on a few more subjects, but I don't think we're going to have time this afternoon. So I guess we'll just have to do a round two. This has definitely been one of my favorite conversations that I've been lucky to have. I do want to ask, what are your probably, let's say, I want to ask you for your favorite. What are, for people at home want to, want to know what they should buy? What are your kind of top 5 tequila brands out there, or distilleries, and why is that?
Brands would be much more difficult, but producers, I mean, obviously Fortaleza, and I don't say that because I worked for the brand. Like, I went and worked for the brand because I loved and believed in it from the get-go.
Yeah.
um, and I'm always going to have like a huge place in my heart and soul for Siete Leguas. That's where my real tequila journey starts. um, Besides the fact that they do great stuff. Anything from El Pandillo, from La Teña, and then then over here we have the fifth, right? Like I mean, I would have to say anything from Arete. I love Arete, and anything from El Tecleña. Don Fulano and all those brands, and then what El Tecleño is doing too. Like I like that their Platino, which I still see as a Blanco. Like I tasted that blind a year and a half ago, and it ended up rating higher than I've ever rated, because I'm a dick when it comes to rating um, blind tasting and actually doing ratings. Um, but it's the highest rated tequila that I had done, and it was absolutely delicious. Um, and then and then Costco in. So it's hard to have like only 5.
Yeah. We only have about 2.5 more minutes. I totally forgot to even ask about your new project, which is with
Yes.
the Museum of Distilled Spirits, right? The Tequila
Correct.
Education Coordinator.
Yep.
Where can people go to learn more about that?
So right now, this is like just launching, right? It was supposed to be a physical space that was going to break ground in Las Vegas this year, but hey, COVID, awesome, right? So it's going to live in the virtual world, but the idea is to have this, physical um, building where you can go into, and you're going to have different rooms of whiskeys, rums, tequila, well, agave distillates to encompass everything. And within, when you walk in, it's going to, express, what these distillates are about, whether we're talking about the art and history and culture of them, the crops that are going to be there, and uh, so you fully immerse yourself so that when ideally when you go in, you're going to have like actual like grains within the whiskey room, and to be able to smell like each of the different types of grains, right? And then to go into the rum room, and what would be really super rad is like an actual like like cane that's growing within there, right? So that you can have like this fully immersed experience of education. And then have seminars. It's going to be something that's going to be open every day for 24/7, like Vegas. It's going to be very Vegas-y in that aspect. And what's going to be rad is like, so you know as you're working the market and you come in to Vegas, it's like, hey, let's get you set up and you know do an event, right?
Yep.
And so get everybody that's involved within the industry, all the bartenders, so that it's going to be fully educational across the board. So great experience in every aspect.
That sounds like an awesome project, man. We'll keep watching you on social media to keep tabs on that.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for taking some time out. Like I mentioned, man, I know, like I said, we didn't have questions. We had questions we didn't quite get to. So we'll be sure to do a round 2 to wrap up some of those things in the future, man. Khrys, thanks so much. Take
absolutely,
care of yourself, man.
Sounds great. I appreciate it.
Everybody watching at home, thank you guys so much. Don't forget to subscribe to the Samson Surrey TV channel on YouTube, and we will see you next Thursday. Peace.